Okay, so we need to have this discussion. See, there's been a trend in the last decade, particularly Disney has spearheaded this thing. And you guys already know from the title of the video, from the context of the video, the subject, the topic, anything we're talking about in this video, you're probably guessing what that trend is, and that is this live action remake thing where they take a beloved property movie, something that was made years and years ago, and then just remake it in live action. It's obviously usually these animated classics that were big pillars of the studio, and it's an easy way to grab cash while also, keeping that movie IP character, whatever it is they're adapting, pretty relevant in the zeitgeist. We get them pretty much every year at this point, mainly from Disney, and usually these movies are really old beloved classics, but we've gotten two recently, and this time it's different. See, the two movies that I'm comparing today have released in a month of each other, but before I get to those, I just want to make it clear I did enjoy both of these, even if it was to various degrees. But even with that being said, I don't condone any of these, nor do I think these are necessary or should be made or should exist. That's my stance on it completely. They are classics for a reason. If you want, children, a new generation, new audiences to like them, re-release them in theaters. Re-release the classics, update the animation, maybe something like that, rather than just cash grab it by just doing it in live action, which I do dislike the sentiment people have against animated things. It's a whole thing. That's a whole video in and of itself. But I mean, this year started out with one. We got the live action Snow White. And for the good people, the actors, crew that are all great people that worked on that, it's unfortunate and I feel for them that the movie did bad. But it's also not a completely bad thing that it didn't do well. See, the more these things do bad, the less they'll make. And so going into the month of May and June, we had two coming out, Lilo and Stitch and How to Train Your Dragon. But this time it was different because these two movies both were made in the 21st century. Most of these remakes up until now have been, adaptations of classics from like the 90s or before. Movies from a much different generation compared to something like a Lilo and Stitch and definitely a How to Train Your Dragon. And it seems like this is only going to become more and more apparent as Disney is also currently, or I think they finished already filming a live action Moana, which is like, what are we doing exactly? But to compare these two, I mean, it's apples to oranges, but at the same time, one can clearly and easily has a better ground to start off of, right? I'd say How to Train Your Dragon, the animation is more cinematic than Lilo and Stitch, and it creates a much better foundation to adapt it into live action, right? In Lilo and Stitch, sure, it's this alien creature that becomes friends with this little girl, in the state of Hawaii. And it does have those realistic elements that say, that comes with this type of story in E.T., even a How to Train Your Dragon. But I think the difference is that it's played up. It's almost like a cartoon, while How to Train Your Dragon is temporarily or somewhat still based in reality. See, Lilo and Stitch, I think personally, was made still with the best intentions possible outside of the cash grabby hands of the studio. They got Dean Fleischer Camp to write that, at least, which I love. I love that guy, and I think he's very inspirational, coming from, a background of doing YouTube shorts and all that. It's just great to see. And he also brought the children's choir back from the original to create music for this new one, and he made an effort to keep that Hawaiian culture that was so integral. But DreamWorks made the much smarter choice to bring as many people back who worked on the original as they could. You see, that iconic score was brought from the same composer once again. The writers of the original returned. Gerard Butler returned. Hell, they even brought back the man who directed the original, which is funny because he also directed Lilo and Stitch. Looks like one of these studios were using their brain cells. Although getting the man responsible for this banger, I wouldn't say that's a bad choice. But Dean DeBlois has never directed a live action movie, and for DreamWorks to really give him that was, a very ambitious for him and for the studio, and it was a real swing. And I appreciate how much he cares for, obviously, the franchise, considering he created it, but just how much he was willing to take that step in order to avoid this, being something that is a complete and utter cash grab with no soul behind it, no passion behind it, with just paid directors shooting a script.
I pitched myself. So Universal contacted me and said, we're kicking the tires on the idea of reimagining this in live action. And even though I had put the trilogy to bed with that third movie, I felt like that's a decade of my life. I can move on to different stories and different characters. The fact that they were considering it just gave me this knee-jerk response of, I don't want to see someone else's version of this. I'm too protective of the characters and the world, and I know where the heart is. So I said, I get that I haven't made a live action film yet, but please let me do it, because I can guarantee that we import all of the wonder and the emotion of that original into this version.
Just from that clip alone, you can see there's just more care. You look at the movie, the costumes are made with care. The production design, the visual effects are amazing in this movie. And it's so odd because Lilo and Stitch feels like a movie adaptation, while the live action How to Train Your Dragon feels almost like a reenactment, for better or for worse, depending on, how much you enjoy the movie. It's so true to its predecessor, down to straight up whole chunks of dialogue ripped from the movie, replicating shot after shot from the animated original, which is the kind of choice that should be kind of a no-brainer in hindsight, but it's also the kind of choice that can bring up a multitude of issues when it comes to executing that in live action. Lilo and Stitch made changes, but it understood what made the original work, even if it wasn't remotely as effective. Stitch being a cute little menace, and Lilo being adorable and having great chemistry with everyone, with the center core being family as that beating heart. But undoubtedly changes were made, especially with its ending, and that resulted in some polarizing reactions, oddly, from a movie that I thought was fairly harmless and innocent. But there's just such a clear distinction in that live action Lilo and Stitch between whenever the movie is being completely CG and animated versus when they begin to integrate those live action elements. Because they're adapting such wild imagery at points that aren't based in reality in the slightest at all, when it gets to the points of the movie that deal with reality, that separation feels jarringly obvious. Whereas How to Train Your Dragon has extremely fantastical imagery and huge personalities, but it's all grounded in a world that could be believed. Toothless isn't a dragon from an alternate universe that came through a portal and transformed into a turtle. He's just a dragon. And it's that type of groundwork that's all over the How to Train Your Dragon franchise that I think ultimately set this up for success from the very get-go. See, this is DreamWorks' first time at bat, swinging for the fences with this whole live-action remake thing. And they've managed to be better than pretty much every single one of Disney's. Although, Jon Favreau cooked with that Jungle Book. And Cruella, you're underrated. I love you. Your soundtrack is chef's kiss. My point is, should these be being made at all? No. But I completely understand the reason why this was made. Not only for the money, but there's a generation of people that just did not get to watch these movies. Small kids now growing up that don't know what these movies were. And as Universal is crafting their Isle of Berk in their parks, those kids being able to go to a Universal Studios and watch their face light up when they see Toothless is kind of a special feeling that many of us saw when we were children in that movie theater, seeing Toothless for the first time and falling in love with Berk. The movie is not perfect, but when it comes to these cash grabby live action remakes, I think How to Train Your Dragon is by far the one spearheaded with pure passion and great intentions. That's not to say it's the best live action remake or no live action remake can be better than this. It's just from the approach to the groundwork, to the crew they put on the movie. You can tell they at least cared. They cared enough to build out Burke physically and not just put a bunch of CGI on the screen. They cared enough to cast these characters, but also give them a little bit more depth. Right, I think 𝙂is phenomenal in the original trilogy, and I think in this first movie, comparatively, 𝙂 is given a little bit more to chew on, which I really appreciated. Now, I won't sugarcoat and just be honest. When I sat in that theater, the first 20-25 minutes were like, oh, so they're really just doing the animated movie beat by beat. Now, I don't know if this is really gonna work. It feels like, I said before, a reenactment, but as the movie progressed, specifically once the movie got into the training to slay dragons, that's where that story, Toothless, Hiccup, and the world of Burke really just won me over once again. It's a timeless tale, and if anyone disagreed, I mean, this just proved it. I went with some family members. Everyone I went with has seen the original movie, besides one. And he really enjoyed this. Like, came out and was like, I've been missing this whole time. I'm gonna go home and watch the original movies. And then I told him, wait, there's 3. And he's like, there's 3 of these? Where does it go? And seeing someone so interested in this franchise kind of made me realize, you know, while I don't condone these remakes, I do think every now and then they have its place. And that's a nuanced conversation that probably most people aren't ready to have, especially the vocal people. But this movie was made with passion and heart, and that's all I can ask for. Now, was that the intentions with the studio? Probably not. But the people on it wanted to make their best version of a live action interpretation of this story. And for Dean DeBlois to care enough to step into the limelight and direct this first live action movie in general, at the frightening possibility that if he had not accepted it, the studio might have walked up to someone, gun for hire, and given them the job, I think the result ultimately speaks for itself. There's passion behind this. This wasn't a couple months of shooting and then throwing it out on the screen or fixing stuff in post. No, this was made with at least care for the details, care for the characters, and care for the world. This entire trend of just taking pre-existing classics, IP, or whatever the studio has and just remaking it in live action is extremely lazy, cash grabby, and I don't like it. And sure, people can defend it by being like, oh, there's a generation that didn't get to experience it. I don't care. These shouldn't be made, and that's just my thoughts on it. But I did admittedly enjoy the live action How to Train Your Dragon, but you tell me if you did. Go and leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you made it this far, please do me a favor. If you like these types of videos, like the video, subscribe and click that bell that we're notified every time we upload. We talk about movies, TV, pop culture all the time on here, so do not miss it anytime we do. But yeah, give me your thoughts on either of these 2 movies. Did you like them? Did you not? Anything related? Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. But other than that, it's been your boy 𝙎𝙬, and hopefully I see you all in the next one.